Bonjour les amis. This is Generator coming to you directly from the City of Light. I'm Jane Bertch, a Chicago native, Paris-based entrepreneur, author, and your partner in personal reinvention. I've spent the past 20 years living and working in Paris, and after leaving the corporate world and deciding to create something of my own, I've discovered both the beauty and the challenge of building a life shaped by curiosity, creativity, and a sprinkle of courage. These are the practices that lead to true transformation. So whether you're planting a seed in your jardin secret, your secret garden, or giving voice to your creativity for the very first time, let's step into your next chapter with intention. And of course, with a touch of Parisian charm. So as we say in French, on y va, let's go. Bonjour, everyone. Welcome back to Generate Her. I am so happy today to have this amazing woman, Laura Sanders, here, who you're just going to discover this incredible path that she has taken to lead her to one of my favorite businesses in Paris, I have to say, because I always hear people wanting to have this little slice of Paris, and she does that for a living, slices of Paris. But we'll talk about that as we get further along. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me. Good morning.
So pleased to have you. So let's start out just sharing, who's this wonderful person in front of me? How did you get here today?
I guess to get started, I'm a Texas girl. I was raised in Dallas, Texas, went to the University of Texas, which is a natural path for Texas people. And then as soon as I graduated, I moved to New York City, wanted to see the big city. And then somehow I ended up with a lot of French friends.
It just doesn't happen randomly, does it?
I mean, this is like, early 20s bar situation. So yeah, I just ended up with a ton of French friends. There's an enormous amount of French people in Lower Manhattan. And to be honest, I spent a lot of time in Europe with my family as a child, but mostly kind of Northern Europe, Germany and stuff. So my band of French friends in Lower Manhattan became, my connection to France. And through that, I met my future husband, current husband, that way. So that's the naissance of my French relationship. Now I have a French husband, 3 French daughters, and that is how I ended up in France. The real estate part of the story, I ended up working for the Sunshine Group, which is like a new development outfit in New York City. Beautiful, beautiful Starchitect properties. So when I say Starchitect, it's like, the big famous architects. So I was working on these amazing properties, amazing design, amazing architecture. It was a really incredible job. And then I moved to Paris and started working in kind of like the typical real estate market. And when I say typical, I think your listeners probably understand that in Paris, the real estate market is traditionally only represented the sellers, and the buyers really were kind of on their own. And then there's several Anglophones that came into the market saying, this is ridiculous,
Right.
And so they developed a whole new thing, which now is usually called a chasseur, which means hunter in French. And, that would be kind of like the same as a buyer's agent. So, lots of Anglophones came in and said, to Anglophone clients, you're not on the ground, you're unable to go door to door, which is typically what's required. You really have to be in front of the agents if you want to buy a property, saying like, hi, I have...
Oh, gosh.
Millions. Could I please, buy a property? And
it's so different here. Let me just segue into it now, because I know people are always fascinated with this. A good bit of the properties that I have lived in here, I found out before they hit the market. And that is because of relationships. And that's something I talk about all the time. So it's just another cultural reminder of the importance of relationships. The people get the good stuff because they're notified before everyone else.
Absolutely. The really beautiful apartments on the top floors with the view of whatever monuments, those are passed down in families between families and friends. So accessing these properties is difficult. You got to be on the ground, knocking doors, reaching out to all your friends and family saying, does anybody know anything? I got started doing that in Paris. And then Americans or Anglophones in general buying properties. At the beginning, they're always saying, I don't want to do any renovations. And then once you start seeing the properties, you're like, I do want to do renovations.
Yes, absolutely.
Typically, at a minimum, the kitchens and bathrooms it's gotten better over the years, but in general, the standard of the kitchens and bathrooms is not something that an Anglophone would want. So once you've been in a few apartments, you realize you're going to have to do that work. I started as like the buyer's agent, started helping people do the renovations. And way back when, people would buy these properties, rent them out, and make a ton of money, cover their mortgage, cover their renovation costs. And then Airbnb was created and angered the entire world. And then because of Airbnb and the prevalence of these short-term rentals, there was a crackdown. And so now if you have a secondary residence, and you have to legally register what kind of property your apartment is, so they know that it's a secondary residence, it's illegal to rent it short term. So the possibility of having a pied-à-terre still exists, but it would probably need to be empty a large portion of the year, which most people aren't comfortable with financially, or just having an empty property. And so back in 2008, I worked on my first fractional, and that's when they came to Paris. And that was the same time that the Airbnb crackdown kind of started happening. And the idea with fractional is it's the same as having a pied-à-terre, meaning you have this apartment that you come to every time. It's your home. But when it's fractionalized, you're only paying the portion that you're using, and somebody else is managing it for you. So the headache of finding the apartment, the headache of renovating it, the ongoing maintenance, all of that is handled by us. And so I started in 2008. My partner also started in 2008. We left Paris at the same time. I left because my husband was sent on an expat contract. And then we just happened to come back to Paris at the same time. This is back in 2022. And we were having a coffee, and he said, "Hey, do you want to do this again?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." He suggested we do it together. So that's when we formed Fractional France. And we are now on our 5th property. So it's been quite successful, and it's fun. It's fun finding these apartments, creating them, and then delivering a dream to a lot of people.
Yeah. I've had the pleasure of seeing one of your properties, I think, early on. It was remarkable. So these are properties that are not the average Parisian apartments, which makes them even more incredible to have a little slice of Paris. So bravo. So I want to talk about some of the things you've raised in this beautiful sharing of who you are, because there's so many great themes that I think we can dig into. And I'm going to say them out loud so I don't forget them, because that's who I am these days. You talked about traveling to Europe early on, and I want to dig into that and the importance of traveling and how that might have formed who you are today. That's such a rich experience you had early on. You used the word knocking on doors and getting things done in Paris, which kind of happens at a different pace and in a different way. So I want to talk about that, because people are always, I've only been here 20 years. I could be here a lifetime and I will still never be French, nor do I need to be. What has worked for me is being an American who's respectful of the culture that I'm in, learning from it. So I want to talk about that a bit, because I'm sure you've had some fun experiences. We talked about the change in the market. Any business, particularly, I will say in Paris, sometimes I do find it's the vortex of hell of everything that can go wrong when you have a business in Paris. And it's a yin yang, because it's also very beautiful and it gives you exposure to different parts of the world. But the market shifts a lot. Things change. This year now we're dealing with an extraordinary heat wave. That's not fun. But you had a major shift in the market that you actually, instead of saying, okay, it's getting too bumpy for me, you found a way to reestablish yourself and actually set up something that's quite fabulous. So I want to talk about that. And then lastly, I just want to talk about cultural awareness and maybe some fun things you've learned being an American mom with French husband and French girls. I imagine there's still things even after all these years, because you are very French, quote unquote. You're so much a part of the culture that you are one of the Americans I know that truly are so culturally aware of what's going on here. So let's start with traveling early on, because I didn't get to travel to Europe until I was in my late teens. And if there's something that I see is such a differentiator, is travel and being exposed to different cultures. So I asked myself, is that why you were able to meet and connect with your French friends early on?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've always been how would I say this? Just interested in everything, I guess. And it's a fine line too, because I grew up with my father completely embarrassing me every time he jumped into a taxi. He'd be like, "Where are you from?" And then it was like a really long conversation because he was like truly interested. And I've was extremely embarrassed by that, but now I do the exact same thing.
Mm.
The only problem is today, it's like some people at the beginning put up a front because where are you from? And sometimes that could lead to something bad. But as soon as they understand that I'm like truly interested and have anecdotes about where they're from, or maybe I could speak a little bit of their language, they really open up. And I've had some beautiful conversations. And clearly it's not just limited to taxi rides, but you can have some very interesting conversations in a taxi.
Yeah, so you're touching on curiosity, right?
Yes.
And that to me is one of the most powerful business tools you can have.
Yeah.
And it's just that ability to say, I'm going to be nosy here and I'm going to knock on this door and go in and introduce myself, or I'm going to be curious enough to try to solve this problem. It is such a beautiful skill and it helps with those relationships that you're trying to develop. Just that curiosity in someone.
I guess curiosity is like my raison d'etre. I don't know. I just love reading and finding out about things and talking to people. That's actually why this is not a typical real estate job as well,
Yeah.
because it's real estate combined with being a tour guide as well, because you're helping people sure find a property in Paris, but also discover, oh, look up, like that was some wall from some royal campaign or something historically relevant happened exactly on this spot. It's not just like the shopping, the wine, and the food. It's all of that and so much more.
Absolutely. Is there any experience that you had in your younger years traveling that you think really marked you in a positive way?
I can't think of anything in particular, but it was just like, I mean, Texas is a beautiful place, but it's a bit homogeneous, and so I just love like change all the time, and I don't know if you want to go into this, but through my husband's job, like we've lived in, so now I've lived in Dallas, New York. I met him. We lived in Geneva, Switzerland, Paris. We've lived in London, we've lived in Qatar, we've lived in Saudi Arabia. I've been kind of everywhere and I love it. A lot of these expat assignments were a 3-year deal. So the first year was always kind of an exploration. The second was like being comfortable. And then the third year was going away parties.
Oh, God. Wow. Well, let's talk about that for just a quick sec before we move on, because that takes readaptation each and
Yeah.
every time. And for a lot of people, it is uncomfortable. I've moved to different countries and it remains uncomfortable, but you still find a way forward. What are some of the tips or tricks, or what are some of the things just about your core personality that makes that okay and it's exciting? I mean, how do you entrench yourself every time when you pick up and move?
For me, always the first year, it's very important to be like out on the street and observe just how do things work? How do people interact? So the people aspect down to how does the street traffic flow? Because in general, I don't like to drive first immediately when I get somewhere. I just, particularly in big cities, I want to observe it. And then once I'm comfortable with knowing how it works, then I'll get in a car and drive. And that was true of London. That was true of Paris. And then just knowing what's available, like what are the restaurants, what are the shops, what are the museums, just so it's very much like exploration and observation at the beginning, I think, is the most important. And then clearly along the way, you're making friends and all of that as well.
Absolutely. Again, I'm hearing the theme of curiosity. Such a great undercurrent to everything. And then the observation, and something I think you touched on that's so important, is being aware and observing sometimes before you, what's the word I want to say? To be aware and observe before you insert yourself.
Yes.
To just have that moment where you step back and it's when I tell people when you're shopping at the market, there is the thoughts that you can't touch the vegetables. Yes, but in certain places. And the only way that you'll know that is before you just dive in, just step back and observe, what are people doing? How are they interacting with each other? What are the things you hear? And when you do that, you'll hear that people will greet each other before they ask for something. You'll see that they'll grab a bag because it's available, or they won't because it's not. It's just these observational skills that I think you just dropped that in there, but that's so important, especially when you're traveling.
Yeah, there's only so many times you can get yelled at a little bit for doing it incorrectly that you learn, yes, no, I need to watch first.
Absolutely. And no one can scold you like a market vendor
Exactly.
or an old lady at a bus stop.
Exactly. Or a grandmother.
Or a grandmother. They'll scold you real well. So speaking of culture, let's talk about relationships, because you use the term knock on doors, and that's something that I wonder, would French people say that? Because that to me strikes me as, I use that term and I ask myself, is that very North American to knock on doors? What would the French say?
They would never knock on a door.
No, they wouldn't. They would need to be presented by somebody, right? How did you do that? That's not easy. It takes a lot of gumption.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely metaphorical, but in terms of, you do knock on doors a bit in terms of like the agency relationships, but it would be like going to every shop, because again, there's no MLS in France. It's extremely like hidden, because they know once they have a listing, they can like contact the 5-10 people that ask for that specific thing and sell it immediately. So you really have to be, in front of them at the beginning. As soon as you have something to either look for or to search for somebody else, you're presenting yourself at every agency saying, I've got 2 million for a client. They're a serious client. They're paying me to look. So they're serious. And you really have to be in front of them for them to call you first, because they know they have a list of people looking for the same thing, and they'll reach out to the French before, unless you have a relationship with them, unless you are in front of them all the time,
Absolutely. So persistency. The knocking on doors, if it were literal, you'd be knocking on their door every day to remind them you're here. You have to be present with people to develop relationships here.
To be fair, I feel like that's kind of a modern thing as well. Even in North America, it's like people are just so busy that you've got so much going on, particularly in mom life. You're managing so many things that if it's just not the top of mind and it wasn't a recent conversation, sometimes you just forget about it.
Very true. We're all just so busy and oversaturated with information. It's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. I hate to say it. But here in France, I do feel like there's that other level of circles of influence that in North America, I feel like I can quickly develop a connection with somebody.
For sure.
I still have to stay present to maintain it. But here, the connection part takes so much longer, in my experience. Yeah. However, the beauty of it, and I'd love to know what you think, I've been able to infiltrate because I'm different. Yeah. I didn't have to follow the social codes.
Yes. I agree. And I feel like this might be different for everybody, but a perfect level of Americanness.
Let's talk about it, because people will want to know, what does that mean?
So, of course, the bonjours, like all the beginning French social codes, you certainly need to follow, but we're much smilier than they are. And I think that people appreciate that. And we also kind of moved to being more informal much quicker. And I think people do appreciate that well, if you opened the relationship with the French formality.
Yes, that's a very big caveat. You have to have that starting point. You cannot start informally, because you will offend people, which is really small things that don't seem very consequential.
Exactly. In the volume as well, the being too loud at the beginning just completely puts them off, which I don't know. I guess in some parts I agree with now, and then some parts too, I'm like, come on, live a little. So I'm a little conflicted on that one.
I know, but it's such a fun kind of social experiment, isn't it? Like you said, number one, I want people to hear that being different is okay. And you can find a way to make that work for you. That's not code for be disrespectful and not aware. That is just be okay with your very American accent when you're trying to speak French. Be okay to smile. That's wonderful. Still always understand and respect how things operate.
You must open with the bonjour, otherwise you're dead.
Yes. And you know what? I have seen French colleagues cut each other off because one of them launched into something. I was at Metro, which is a professional shopping store for businesses, and I'm standing in line and I see one colleague come up to the other with a piece of paper and just start asking, what is this? The face on the other one was priceless. I wish I could have gotten a video. She rolled her eyes so hard, I thought they were going to fall out of her head. And she looked at her colleague and said, Deja, bonjour. And I thought, okay, it's not, I love that.
Oh, I enjoy that a French person got yelled at for the same thing. So that's good.
Exactly. Exactly.
that, that, and then something I found important, which as we've moved on with years, some of the agents think I'm being silly, but I learned early on when you're seeing an apartment, you always ask to take photos. The younger agents think I'm being silly, but the older agents, there used to be clients that were like extremely afraid of having photos of their apartments taken because they thought that people were taking pictures to record like the art in their apartment
Ah,
and people would come and steal it. I don't know if that was a real thing or just like a fear. But anyway, the older agents always appreciate you
they
asking.
appreciate you asking. Absolutely. And I think this is a general rule for France. And I can really only speak to Paris. I always advise people ask before you take a photo.
Yes.
And the private life and private spaces are so sacred to French. You'll never get a tour of their home if they invite you over for dinner. So to come in and then just start taking pictures
Yeah.
is very off-putting and alarming to people. And again, the same if you go into a boutique. This is likely to be the extension of somebody's home. If it's a small business, their family has grown up there. You greet them, you're stepping into their space. You don't come and start taking a picture of everything. And this is a country where not too long ago, you had to ring a bell to get into a boutique. I remember that you just couldn't walk in. You'd ring the bell and then you couldn't touch anything. They would have to show you what you wanted to buy,
Exactly.
right?
And tell you what you should buy.
Well,
And
it's
tell you
off.
that is not for you, but this is for you.
Yes, yes, in a way that will shock you.
Yes. And
Um,
sometimes they're extremely right. Sometimes I disagree with their opinion, but anyway.
yeah. But it's just a reminder of how sacred personal spaces are because Americans tend to be more open, and that can be surprising when you're wanting to take a photo to show off this beautiful thing and you're actually offending somebody. So that's a great cultural tip. So let's talk about the market as it's evolved. And one thing I love, because gosh knows I've been there, is things will just change dramatically and it'll put your core in question. Can you maintain a business? How do you continue to operate under these circumstances? You had the entry of a key player in the market that changed the way the city wanted to handle short-term rentals. It almost obliterated it. But you use that opportunity to say, we're still going to give you this joy and this slice of Paris, as I like to call it, but in a different form that actually is probably a better solution for a lot of people. How did you, not just the logistics of, I understand how you did that, but how did you, Laura, step back and reassess and adjust during what could have been a really scary period?
So I guess I wasn't confronted with it in the same way, in that,
Okay.
like, thank God I wasn't managing a rental business, for
Right.
example. It happened organically at the same time for us. Just the idea, and to be honest, I guess it was like a godsend for us because
Right.
we weren't dealing with the trying to find commerciality to continue to run our rental business because we simply weren't doing that. And we had already started this fractional business. And because of like them saying you can't rent, all of a sudden we had this like natural boom of customers. I'd like to say that I was a genius and created this amazing idea. That's unfortunately not true. It was more of a case of being in the right place at the right time.
Yes, that's very modest, but I know very well that being in the right place at the right time also has to be coupled with endurance. It
Yes.
also has to be able to operate with insecurities and little information because we know that when changes happen around us, they could very well happen to us at some point. So,
That's true. I mean, France is a bit crazy, like from one moment to the next. If a different party all of a sudden has power, they radically change a lot of things quite quickly and they
yeah.
don't care about what's gone on in the past. So, yeah, taxation can change radically from one moment to the other. Rules, regulations. Also, the French legal system is radically different than ours. So, yeah, you always kind of have to be ready to consult with your attorney and figure out how to handle the next. It's true, but all that fun, I'm not sure.
You know, it is not fun, but what I love is what underpins that.
Mm.
And this is not a story about how my business has overcome things in the past or how they will in the future or yours. This is a story of being able to operate even though you never have all the answers. So that's what I
Yep.
want people to hear. And being able to operate knowing that, as you said, in France in particular, and I really can't speak to other countries, it can change overnight and it
Yep.
can change dramatically. And it's almost as much a part of the culture than anything else, that a new party will overhaul everything. And so
Yep.
that always leaves us with, we can only move forward with what we know today. It's never a perfect situation. We
Mm.
never have all the information about anything. We just move forward with what we know today. And I think that's the message I would love people to hear.
It's such a cultural thing too. I think that comes from like the Royalist Society, vesty people completely cutting it down, people having the power. So I think that's like the origin of the dramatic shifts, but then it's also because of the legal system. So like our legal
Absolutely.
system is built on judicial decisions and a long, slow process on decisions made with the context of like modern times and bit by bit, whereas theirs is very legalist, or how would I say this? It's driven by the law and there's specific statutes on everything. At least they try and have specific statutes on everything. But when you're doing something new, there's not a statute on it. So you
Right.
try to operate with what exists, but it's just very different than what we grew up with.
Yeah. So everybody listening, there's your, if you need permission to just act without the information, there you go. Thanks to Laura. Listen, my last thing I'd love to know, Laura, because I ask every guest, is there anybody that, I like to use the word role model, which I've learned that does not really exist in French,
Okay.
which I'd love to dig into that. And I will one day. Is there anybody that has really influenced you that you think has been a big part of your story?
I don't know if I would say big part of my story,
Okay.
but someone who I read about years ago who I just found incredibly interesting. This is a bit obscure and niche, but
That's very French of you.
it's a woman named Gertrude Bell. Have you ever heard of her?
No, I have not, but now I'm curious. Tell me.
Okay, so she was born, I believe, in like the mid 1800s in the UK. She's British, from a wealthy family. She had the chance actually to go to Oxford, which at the time, a few women were allowed to study a few subjects, but I don't think they were actually like awarded the degrees. They were just allowed to study. So she did that. And then I think she went to London for like the ball season to try and find her match, and then was very put off by the whole thing. And then somehow, I don't know how, she ended up like in the Middle East and she was everywhere. So like she was in Egypt, she was in Mesopotamia, like she was
Wow.
in Syria, in Saudi Arabia, which didn't exist at the time, Iran as well. She was everywhere. And she was a precursor to T.E. Lawrence. Like she did a lot of stuff he did and taught him like his kind of tradecraft afterwards, which I thought was super cool because all the stories are about him, but there was a
Right.
woman behind the scenes
Behind
that kind of
him.
taught him everything. Yeah. And she was like an explorer, a writer, an archaeologist, and yeah, super interesting at the time.
Wow. So what resonated with you?
That's the kind of like the through line we've ended up on. It's the
Yeah.
curiosity. It's the woman just being like, oh, this is boring. That sounds interesting. Let me go look at that. I just found that fascinating.
Yeah. And at a time when it was probably very difficult to do so.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful reminder that we can find our role models everywhere. And we only see little insights of their lives. So it's wonderful to cherry pick what we love and use that to hopefully construct who we want to be.
Well, I feel like sometimes too, as a woman, or at least like a young woman, hearing these kind of stories like gives you permission in some way.
Oh,
You're like, oh, someone else did this. I can certainly do this.
absolutely. And those stories are so precious. We know it, especially when they are built upon something significant, which is, I am not in any way anti-social media. I use it and it has been a great tool for my business. So I don't want this to be the message, but I'm also very careful about what I consume. And I
Yes.
love to see messages that are of some depth and importance because we've got a lot that is not.
Yep.
as we know. Well, how wonderful. What a great place to end. And I'm going to discover this beautiful woman. I'm going to go nose around. So thank you for sharing her. I had no clue who she was. And maybe we'll have a curious listener that will check her out. But Laura, thank you. This has been such a wonderful discussion about business, about characteristics, about curiosity, and filled with lots of little cultural insights. So it's nice to have that from a North American, because to get a view of how things operate. So I'm really thrilled that you joined us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
You are welcome, and I hope to see you soon.
Absolutely.
Before we go any further, if what I've been talking about today resonates with you, I want you to know there's a space for you that I've created. Several times a year, I gather a small group of women in Paris for what I call les saisons, the seasons. These are my retreats. They are very tiny, very intimate. Each one is designed around the time of year. So not just the season we're in physically, but hopefully the season we're in our internal seasons. And it's just a wonderful time to return to ourselves. In spring, we talk about planting. In September, it's the rentrée season, which is a beautiful time in Paris. And in the fall, it's the harvest, la vendange, because how can we not talk about wine and all those wonderful messages? So these are not spa weekends, they're not shopping, they're not tourist trips. These are 3 days in one of the most transformative cities in the world, designed to help you pause and realign and start to really think and step into what's next for you. And the women who come, they're curious, they're brave, they're open-hearted, they're just phenomenal. They're hopeful, they're community-based. And if that sounds like you, I'd love to have you join. So take a look at my website. I'm constantly updating different dates for Les Saisons retreats, and I'd love to have you here. You can find them all at janebertch.com/retreats.